The sun was shining brightly as the Turner family gathered in their backyard. A perfect day for some family time. Their small, quiet neighborhood, nestled in the heart of suburban America, was supposed to be their safe haven, a place where they could unwind after long days and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. For Claire and David Turner, it was a dream come true. They had worked hard to afford a house in this tranquil community, one where they believed their children would grow up feeling secure, loved, and free from conflict. But that dream was about to be shattered by something they never saw coming, a conflict that would tear at the very fabric of their sense of safety. Their daughter, Ella, a sweet 10-year-old with a radiant smile and a heart full of love, had always been their pride and joy. Ella, who had been born with cerebral palsy, was the center of their world. Every day was a new challenge, but her determination and infectious laughter made it all worth it. She never let her disability define her, and neither did Claire or David. To them, Ella was no different from any other child, and they made sure to provide her with everything she needed: love, care, and a sense of belonging. Ella's world was filled with color, creativity, and the unwavering belief that she could do anything despite the physical limitations that came with her condition. But on this particular day, Ella was about to face something much darker than any challenge her disability had thrown her way. It all started with a simple question. "Mom, can I play in the pool?" The neighborhood pool had always been a place of joy for the children in the area, a place where they laughed, splashed, and made memories. Ella had been eyeing it for weeks. She longed to be a part of the fun, even if it meant staying at the shallow end. She had never been allowed to swim before, but her parents, always supportive, had promised to take her to the pool as soon as the weather warmed up. It seemed like the perfect day to ask about it, sunny, warm, and full of possibility. As Claire turned to answer her daughter, a voice interrupted them, sharp and commanding. "What are you doing here?" the voice demanded. It came from the woman at the front gate, the one who always seemed to be watching from behind her curtains. Mrs. Trent, the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, was not someone Claire or David had ever felt comfortable around. She was known for her rules, her harsh demeanor, and her tendency to impose restrictions on anyone she deemed out of line. Claire, who had always tried to keep things cordial with her neighbors, smiled politely and explained that they were just enjoying the day and that Ella was curious about the pool. That's when the first crack in their peaceful life appeared. Mrs. Trent's cold gaze swept over Ella, who was in her wheelchair, her wide eyes sparkling with excitement at the thought of finally joining the other children by the pool. "She can't swim," Mrs. Trent stated flatly, her tone devoid of any warmth. "And I'm not sure she belongs in that area. It's for members, not for people like her." Claire's smile faltered, but she didn't let her frustration show. "She just wants to play near the pool, not swim," Claire replied, hoping to ease the situation. But Mrs. Trent wasn't interested in hearing anything more. Her gaze hardened, and with a dismissive flick of her hand, she turned to leave. But Ella, not understanding the hostility behind the words, asked, "Why can't I play there like everyone else?" That question, innocent and pure as it was, felt like a challenge to Mrs. Trent. Without missing a beat, she snapped back, "Because you're different, and we don't make exceptions." The word stung. Ella's face fell, her excitement fading into confusion. David, who had been inside preparing lunch, stepped outside to find his daughter looking dejected. Claire, her heart heavy with the weight of the conversation, tried to assure Ella that they would find another way for her to enjoy the day. But deep down, Claire knew this wasn't just about the pool. It was about something much more sinister: the underlying prejudice, the exclusion, and the subtle cruelty that often went unnoticed in their seemingly perfect neighborhood. The HOA had always been strict, but this felt personal. Mrs. Trent had made it clear that Ella, because of her disability, was not welcome in the pool area, an area that was supposed to be a community space for everyone. This wasn't just a matter of rules. This was an attack on their basic human rights. The more Claire thought about it, the more the injustice weighed on her. No one had the right to decide who deserved to be part of this community and who didn't. But Claire and David weren't just going to let this go. They loved their daughter too much to let her be treated like this. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm glow over their quiet neighborhood, Claire and David made a promise to Ella. They would stand up for her, no matter what it took. They would not let a single person, no matter how powerful or influential, tear their family apart. But they had no idea just how far Mrs. Trent would go to maintain control, or how much they would have to fight to protect their daughter. What started as a simple request to play by the pool was about to turn into a battle that would change their lives forever. And this was just the beginning. The days that followed the confrontation with Mrs. Trent were heavy with tension. Every time Claire and David saw her in the neighborhood, it was as if a dark cloud hovered over them, a reminder of how quickly their peaceful lives could be turned upside down. What started as an innocent question from Ella about the pool had spiraled into something much more sinister, and now they were forced to grapple with the reality that their daughter's disability had placed her on the receiving end of Mrs. Trent's disdain. As Claire sat in the kitchen one evening, her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the front door. She hesitated, her heart racing. She already knew who it was. Mrs. Trent's presence in the neighborhood was never a good sign, and it was rare for her to knock on anyone's door unless she had a complaint or a demand. Claire opened the door, forcing a smile onto her face, hoping to keep things civil despite the brewing storm within her. "Good evening, Claire," Mrs. Trent said, her voice as cold and calculating as ever. "I need to speak with you about something." Claire's stomach twisted. She had braced herself for something like this, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. She nodded and stepped aside, allowing Mrs. Trent into their living room. David, who had been sitting on the couch with Ella, rose to greet her. His eyes narrowed, but he held his tongue. The last thing they needed was a confrontation in front of their daughter. "I've been thinking about the incident with the pool," Mrs. Trent began, her eyes cold and calculating. "I don't believe Ella should be allowed near that area again. It's a safety issue. And frankly, we can't have people who don't belong causing disturbances. You should understand the importance of maintaining order in this community." Claire felt her blood run cold at the words. "Ella wasn't causing a disturbance," Claire said, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside her. "She just wanted to play near the pool like any other child." Mrs. Trent's lips curled into a thin, unamused smile. "Like I said, she doesn't belong there. This is a private community and we have rules. If you want to be part of this neighborhood, you must follow them. I'm simply trying to protect the integrity of our community." David stepped forward, his voice low and calm. "You're telling us our daughter doesn't belong here? Just because of her disability?" Mrs. Trent's gaze didn't waver, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "I'm not saying that, but you need to be realistic. Some things just aren't meant for everyone. It's not personal, it's about what's best for the community." Claire's heart sank. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about something much deeper. This wasn't a rule. This was an attack on Ella's right to exist as a valued member of the community. And Mrs. Trent wasn't about to stop there. Claire could sense that she was only getting started. "We'll be taking this further," David said, his jaw clenched. "You can't just decide who belongs and who doesn't. Ella has every right to enjoy the amenities this neighborhood offers." Mrs. Trent's eyes flickered with irritation. She stood up abruptly, her posture stiff and rigid. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, David. I'm just trying to prevent any further issues." Her voice became more biting. "I'm warning you. Don't test me on this. We have ways of ensuring compliance around here, and I won't hesitate to take action if necessary." The room fell silent. Claire could feel her heart racing, her hands trembling as she stood beside David, looking at Mrs. Trent. The woman's words weren't just empty threats. There was something deeply unsettling about the way she said them, as though she had the power to control their every move. Ella, who had been sitting quietly on the couch, looked up at the two adults, her innocent face clouded with confusion. "Mom, why is Mrs. Trent so mad at me?" she asked, her voice small and unsure. Claire crouched down to Ella's level. forcing a smile onto her face as she stroked her daughter's hair. "It's nothing, sweetheart. She just doesn't understand how much you wanted to play in the pool." Claire fought to keep her voice steady, but inside, she felt a surge of protectiveness for her daughter. How dare Mrs. Trent make her feel like she didn't belong? How dare she take away something as simple as the joy of playing in the pool? David's face was hard with anger as he glanced back at Mrs. Trent, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You're crossing a line here, Mrs. Trent. No one gets to tell us where our daughter belongs. We're not backing down, and we're not afraid to fight for her rights." Mrs. Trent's expression hardened, but she didn't say another word. With a curt nod, she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. The room was left in an eerie silence, the air thick with tension. Claire felt like the walls were closing in on her. Once Mrs. Trent was gone, David turned to Claire, his face filled with determination. "We're not going to let her get away with this. We'll take this to the HOA board, to the authorities, to anyone who will listen." Claire nodded, but she could feel the weight of the fight ahead of them. They weren't just battling an unfair rule anymore. They were battling a system that believed it had the power to decide who mattered and who didn't. And as much as Claire wanted to believe that everything would be okay, she knew this would be an uphill battle. No one was going to back down easily, especially not Mrs. Trent. For the first time since they'd moved into the neighborhood, Claire realized that the fight for their daughter's rights wasn't just a personal struggle, it was a battle that would test their family's strength and resilience in ways they could never have imagined. And this was only the beginning. Days passed since that tense conversation with Mrs. Trent, but the unease never left the Turner household. Every time Claire stepped into the backyard or looked out at the neighborhood pool, a sharp reminder of the looming conflict gnawed at her. The idea that their daughter's simple request had led to such hostility seemed surreal, but Claire knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. Mrs. Trent's cold dismissal had left an indelible mark on their family, one that couldn't be erased with empty words or fleeting apologies. And now, Claire and David were bracing for the worst. It was just a few days later that the unthinkable happened. Claire and David were enjoying a quiet evening when the doorbell rang again. This time, there was no polite knock, no small talk. When Claire opened the door, she was greeted not by Mrs. Trent's usual haughty demeanor, but by the cold, harsh reality of an official-looking notice. "Good evening," a local law enforcement officer said, his expression grim. "I'm here to inform you that a complaint has been filed against your family. There have been reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood, and we need to talk to Ella." Confusion surged through Claire. "A disturbance? What are you talking about?" The officer handed her the notice, which outlined an accusation, one that was as absurd as it was terrifying. Mrs. Trent had filed a formal complaint, claiming that Ella had been harassing other residents by recklessly asking about the pool, causing disruptions and unnecessary tension in the neighborhood. As if the simple act of asking a question about something every child should be able to enjoy was a criminal offense. "She's accusing our daughter of harassment," David said, his voice low and shaking with disbelief. "This is absurd. We're being dragged into this over nothing." The officer, looking uncomfortable, stepped back. "I'm just doing my job. You'll need to come with me to answer the formal complaint. The HOA is pressing charges. Please ensure that Ella is with you." Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and David's fists clenched at his sides. They were being forced into a corner, their backs pressed against a wall built by a woman who had nothing but contempt for their daughter. The idea that Ella, innocent and kind-hearted, was being dragged into something like this felt like a cruel joke. But this was no joke. This was real. Ella, who had been sitting quietly in the living room, looked up with wide eyes. She sensed something was wrong. "What's going on, Mom? Why are we going with the officer?" David's face softened, his anger giving way to concern as he knelt in front of Ella. "Sweetheart, we need to go with the officer for a little while. But don't worry, everything will be okay. We just need to explain what happened." Ella, ever the brave soul, nodded, though her small face betrayed her confusion. "I didn't mean to make anyone mad, Mom. I just wanted to ask about the pool. I didn't do anything wrong." Claire's heart ached at the innocence in her daughter's voice. "I know, baby. I know," she whispered, trying to steady her own nerves. But inside, everything was falling apart. David took a deep breath, then turned to the officer. "Lead the way," he said, his voice firm, though Claire could see the storm of anger and frustration brewing beneath the surface. As the family followed the officer to his car, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than a simple misunderstanding. This was no longer about a pool or a question asked innocently by a child. This was about power, power that Mrs. Trent wielded with ruthless precision, and a system that had already begun to close ranks against them. The trip to the station felt like an eternity. Ella, sitting quietly between her parents, clung to them for comfort, her small hand in Claire's. Claire did her best to keep her composure, but inside, she was seething. This wasn't just a personal attack on her daughter. It was an assault on their family, on everything they had worked so hard to build. No one should have to live in fear of losing their rights because of one person's prejudice. When they arrived at the station, they were taken into a small room. The air felt thick with tension, and Claire's stomach twisted with dread. Moments later, Mrs. Trent walked in, her expression smug, almost victorious. Behind her, a couple of HOA board members appeared, their eyes cold and calculating. "This is ridiculous." David exploded, stepping forward. "You're using the full force of the HOA to intimidate my family? Over a question about the pool?" Mrs. Trent's lips curled into a smug smile, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You're the one who made this personal, David," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I was simply trying to keep order. But now we have an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's your daughter who's causing the trouble." Ella shrank into her mother, her face pale with fear. Claire's heart broke for her, knowing that this would forever change the way Ella viewed the world around her. No child should ever feel like they were wrong for simply existing. David stepped forward, fury in his voice. "You're punishing my daughter for nothing. This is nothing but a power grab. You're trying to break us." The room fell silent, save for the low hum of tension. Mrs. Trent, undeterred by their anger, continued her crusade. "It's not just about the pool," she said coldly. "It's about setting boundaries. Your daughter is a disruption, and I won't allow her to undermine the integrity of our community." Claire could hardly believe what she was hearing. Mrs. Trent wasn't just concerned about the pool, she was concerned about their entire family's existence in this community. Ella, because of her disability, was being singled out and targeted for something she had no control over. "This isn't over," Claire said through gritted teeth, her voice low and dangerous. "You can't do this to my family." Mrs. Trent simply smirked. "Watch me." And just like that, Claire and David realized that they were no longer just fighting for a simple right to access the pool. They were fighting for their dignity, their daughter's place in the world, and the very notion that they could stand tall in the face of such blatant injustice. The war had begun, and they would not back down. The fight for Ella's future had only just begun. The days following the meeting at the station felt like a nightmare that refused to end. The Turners were no longer just a family. They were a symbol of resistance in a battle they never anticipated. The community they had once called home had turned its back on them, and their own neighbors, people they had known for years, began to look at them with suspicion, if not outright disdain. The accusations levied against Ella had spread like wildfire, and though they were baseless and cruel, the whispers in the streets and the cold shoulders from fellow residents were very real. Ella, normally so full of life, had grown quieter. Her once bright smile now seemed forced, as though she was trying to hold onto a piece of herself that the world was trying to take from her. She spent most of her time in her room, either reading or drawing, her way of escaping from the reality that now haunted her every moment. Claire's heart shattered seeing her daughter withdraw. Ella was a fighter, she always had been. But the weight of the situation, of being treated like an outsider in her own home, was taking its toll. One evening, as Claire sat by Ella's bed, watching her work on a drawing, Ella finally spoke. "Mom," she said, her voice small and hesitant, Why don't they like me? I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to play like everyone else. Claire fought to keep her tears in check, blinking hard as she reached out to hold Ella's hand. Sweetheart, you did nothing wrong, she said, her voice steady but laced with an emotion she couldn't suppress. You are perfect just the way you are. Some people just don't understand that yet, but we're going to make them understand. Ella looked at her mom, her wide eyes filled with confusion. But why are they treating me like this? I didn't hurt anyone. The words tore through Claire's heart, and she pulled Ella into her arms, holding her close as if she could shield her from the world's cruelty. I don't know, honey. I don't know why people are so afraid of what's different, but we won't let them win. I promise you we're going to fight for you. You deserve to be happy, to be free, to enjoy the same things every other kid does. But the truth was, Claire didn't have all the answers. She didn't know how to fix this, how to protect her daughter from the harsh reality that had suddenly become their life. Every time she thought about Mrs. Trent and the HOA, a wave of fury washed over her. They had taken something so simple, so innocent, and turned it into a weapon of exclusion and hate. And it was her daughter who was caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, David was consumed by his own anger. He spent long hours on the phone, talking to lawyers, trying to find a way to challenge the HOA's actions. Every legal avenue he explored seemed to be blocked by the same force that had pushed them into this mess in the first place, Mrs. Trent's influence over the neighborhood. The more David learned about the HOA's tactics, the angrier he became. This wasn't just about a few people in power, it was a system, a network of people who believed they had the right to decide who mattered and who didn't. One evening, after a particularly long day of research and phone calls, David came home with a defeated look on his face. Claire knew the look all too well. It was the same one he had worn when they had first received the notice from the police. I can't find a way through this, he said, collapsing onto the couch. I've called every lawyer I could think of, but the HOA has too much power. They've covered their tracks. No one's willing to take on the case because they know how dangerous it is to challenge them. Claire sat beside him, her hand resting on his. We can't give up, David. We can't let them win. David nodded, his face etched with frustration. I know, but it feels like we're fighting against an entire system, not just one person. Mrs. Trent is everywhere, pulling strings, making sure no one can help us. And Ella is suffering for it. The reality of their situation settled heavily over them. It wasn't just about fighting one woman, it was about fighting a system that had been built to protect the privileged few while keeping everyone else in line. The Turners were up against something far more insidious than they had realized. But as much as the pressure weighed on them, they couldn't back down. Ella had already been forced to bear the emotional burden of being ostracized and blamed for something beyond her control. And Claire wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. The emotional fallout from this battle stretched beyond Ella. It had affected David, Claire, and even their extended family. Claire's parents had called, their voices filled with concern and anger. We can't believe this is happening to you, her mother had said, the disbelief thick in her voice. How can people be so cruel to a child, especially one who's already facing so much? Mom, I don't know what to do. Claire had admitted, her voice breaking. I'm doing everything I can to protect Ella, but it feels like the world is against us. We're so alone in this fight, and that, more than anything, was the hardest part. The Turners had always prided themselves on their strong family values, on the love that bound them together. But in this moment, it felt like the world was conspiring to tear them apart. They were alone, fighting an invisible enemy, and all they had was each other. But the more Claire thought about it, the more she realized that maybe that was enough. They didn't need the approval of their neighbors or the HOA. They didn't need a system that was stacked against them. All they needed was their love for Ella and the strength they drew from each other. Together, they would make sure that this injustice would never go unchallenged. Ella, too, had shown them something remarkable. She hadn't given up. Despite the whispers, the cold stares, and the emotional scars, she still believed that there was good in the world. And if Ella could hold on to that hope, then so could Claire and David. They had come this far, and they would keep fighting. For Ella, for their family, for justice. And no matter how hard it became, they would not back down. This was only the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional toll of the battle against the HOA began to wear on Claire and David. What had started as a fight for their daughter's right to be treated like every other child had evolved into a relentless struggle for justice. The pressure was mounting, but they refused to back down, even as the odds stacked higher against them. The wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly, and with every phone call to a lawyer or community advocate, Claire could feel the walls closing in. Every time David came home after meeting with yet another lawyer or trying to organize a protest, the exhaustion in his eyes was evident. It wasn't just the legal battles that drained him, it was the emotional weight of knowing how much Ella was suffering. She had become withdrawn, retreating into her own world, away from the people who were supposed to be there to protect her. Even though Claire and David did everything they could to reassure her, Ella couldn't escape the harsh reality that she was being treated differently, and worse, that the community she called home had turned its back on her. One evening, after yet another fruitless conversation with the HOA's lawyer, David came home and dropped his briefcase with a heavy thud on the kitchen counter. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale. "It's not looking good," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Every lawyer I talk to says we have no case. The HOA is too powerful. Their network is vast and we're just us." Claire, trying to keep her composure, turned to face him. "We knew this was going to be hard, David, but we can't give up. Ella needs us to stand up for her. She's depending on us to show her that the world won't win, that there's still good out there." David's expression softened and he took a deep breath. "I know. But how do we fight a system that's so deeply rooted? How do we take down an enemy we can't even see, one that's so entrenched in the fabric of our neighborhood?" Claire looked down at Ella, who was sitting in the living room, quietly flipping through a book. The sight of her daughter, still trying to find solace in something as simple as a story, broke Claire's heart. But at the same time, it reignited the fire within her. "Maybe it's not about taking down the whole system," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "Maybe it's about one thing, exposing the truth. Mrs. Trent can keep using her power to control the community, but she can't control the truth. And if we show people what's really happening here, what she's really doing, we'll have won half the battle." David looked at her, a spark of hope igniting in his eyes. "You're right. We don't have to take down the whole system. But we can expose her, show the community what she's doing to our daughter." Claire nodded, feeling a sense of determination settle in her chest. "We need to go public, David. We need to let the world know what's really going on. We can't let Mrs. Trent get away with this." The next few days were a whirlwind of action. Claire and David made the difficult decision to go public with their story. They reached out to local news outlets, hoping that by shining a light on the situation, they could bring the community's attention to the injustice their daughter was facing. The media, eager to report on a scandal involving an HOA and a child with a disability, was quick to take up the cause. But Claire and David knew the battle was far from over. Going public meant exposing themselves to even more scrutiny, but they were willing to take that risk if it meant standing up for their daughter. Meanwhile, the HOA, led by Mrs. Trent, ramped up its pressure. They sent Claire and David threatening letters, warning them to drop their claims or face further legal action. The letters were designed to intimidate, to force them into submission. But the more the HOA pushed, the more Claire and David found their resolve strengthening. They knew that if they backed down now, they would be sending a message to their daughter that she wasn't worth fighting for. As the story spread, the community began to take notice. The whispers that had once been quiet now grew louder. People who had once ignored the Turners or turned a blind eye to the cruelty of the HOA began to speak out. The narrative that Mrs. Trent had tried to create, one of a family in the wrong, started to unravel. More and more neighbors came forward, sharing their own experiences of Mrs. Trent's overreach, her attempts to control the lives of those around her. One particularly powerful moment came when a neighbor, Ms. Harris, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, came forward to speak on the Turners' behalf. She spoke with such conviction, describing Mrs. Trent's attempts to control every aspect of the community, from who could use the pool to who could park in front of their homes. Her testimony was a pivotal turning point in the story, giving the Turners the public support they so desperately needed. But as the battle intensified, so did the toll it took on Ella. The pressure of being thrust into the public eye, of seeing her family torn apart by a cruel system, was beginning to break her spirit. She stopped drawing, stopped reading. She barely spoke, her once vibrant eyes now dull and distant. One evening, after another news segment aired, Claire found Ella sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the stars. Claire sat down beside her, her heart aching as she gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Ella, sweetheart, how are you holding up?" Claire asked softly. Ella didn't look at her right away, but after a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to stop, Mom. I didn't do anything wrong. Why is everyone so angry at me?" Claire's throat tightened, but she didn't have an answer that would make everything better. "I know, baby. I know. But we're going to make them understand. We're fighting for you, for your right to be treated just like everyone else. You're not alone in this. We're with you every step of the way." Ella finally looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and hope. "I know you are, Mom. I don't want to fight anymore. It's too hard." Claire's heart shattered, but she held her daughter tightly, determined to protect her from the cruelty of the world. "We're not giving up, Ella, and we're going to show the world just how strong you are. You don't have to fight alone." In that moment, Claire knew that no matter how hard it got, no matter how many obstacles were thrown in their path, they would never stop fighting. For Ella, for justice, for a future where no one would have to feel small or powerless. This was their fight, and they were in it together. The fight had been relentless, but with each passing day, Claire and David found themselves becoming more entrenched in their battle for justice. The community's reaction was divided. Some rallied behind the Turners, outraged by the way Ella had been treated, while others, those loyal to the HOA and Mrs. Trent, remained silent or defended the oppressive system. Claire knew they were gaining momentum, but the emotional and psychological toll was taking a heavier toll on their family than anyone could have imagined. Ella's condition continued to worsen. She became even more withdrawn, her joy eclipsed by the constant barrage of negativity and ridicule from people who refused to see her as anything but a burden. Claire and David tried their best to comfort her, but the weight of the situation was wearing on all of them. They had always been strong, but now they were finding themselves facing an enemy that seemed to grow more insidious and powerful by the day. It was late one evening when the breakthrough they had been waiting for came, though it arrived in the most unexpected way. The phone rang. Claire glanced at the caller ID, her heart skipping a beat when she saw an unfamiliar name. It was from one of the local journalists who had been covering their case. Claire picked up the phone, her voice shaky as she greeted the caller. "Mrs. Turner, I have some news. It's something you've been waiting for, but it's going to change everything," the reporter said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been digging into Mrs. Trent's history. There's something I think you need to know." Claire's pulse quickened. She sat down, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" The reporter hesitated before speaking again. "I've uncovered something, Mrs. Trent's involvement in several shady dealings within the HOA. It's not just about the pool and your daughter. She's been exploiting her position for years. There's corruption here, and I've got the evidence." Claire felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the reporter replied. "I've spoken to former residents, former board members. Mrs. Trent has been using her position to get what she wants, and it's been happening for a long time. I can send you the details, but you need to be prepared. This could change the entire narrative." Claire's heart was racing. This was it. This was the break they needed. Mrs. Trent's grip on the neighborhood, The authority she had wielded for so long was about to be exposed for what it really was: corruption, manipulation, and abuse of power. And with this evidence, Claire knew they could not only fight the HOA, but could take down Mrs. Trent's reign of terror once and for all. "I'll take whatever you have," Claire said, her voice firm. "Send it to me. We're going public." The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and frantic preparations. Claire and David reviewed the evidence the reporter had sent over: documents, testimonies from former HOA members, and even a secret recording that detailed Mrs. Trent's tactics. It was clear that Mrs. Trent had been manipulating the HOA board to benefit herself and further her agenda, all while enforcing strict, exclusionary rules to maintain control over the community. The weight of what they were about to do didn't escape Claire and David. They knew that going public with this new information would only escalate the battle. They would be making enemies of powerful people. But this wasn't just about protecting their daughter anymore. It was about taking down an entire system that had allowed Mrs. Trent to abuse her power unchecked. The first thing they did was contact the local news station. The reporter who had been following their case was eager to help bring the new information to light. A special news segment was scheduled to air, and the Turners were ready. But as the news segment approached, the pressure only mounted. Claire couldn't sleep, her mind racing with the consequences of what they were about to do. If they exposed Mrs. Trent's corruption, there was no turning back. The HOA would retaliate, and they would stop at nothing to protect their own interests. Claire knew they had to be prepared for the fallout. The night before the segment aired, David came into their bedroom, his face grim. He had been up late, reading through the documents one last time, and he knew the weight of the decision they had made. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed, his voice raw with emotion. "I want to protect Ella. I want to make things right. But this feels like it's going to destroy everything." Claire took his hand, her eyes filled with unwavering resolve. "We've already lost so much. We've lost our peace, our sense of safety, and we've watched Ella suffer. But we can't keep living in fear. We have to fight for her, for the future we want to give her. We can't let this corrupt system continue to control us. We're not alone in this anymore. We have the truth on our side." David nodded slowly, the fear in his eyes mixing with a fierce determination. "You're right. We have to finish this. For Ella. For everyone who's ever been silenced by people like Mrs. Trent." The next day, as the news segment aired, the Turners watched, their hearts pounding in their chests. The footage showed Mrs. Trent's corrupt dealings, her manipulation of the HOA, and the stories of residents who had been hurt by her reign of terror. Claire and David could hardly believe what they were seeing. The truth, once buried under layers of power and control, was finally coming to light. The community's reaction was swift. Some rallied behind the Turners, praising their courage for exposing the truth. Others, still loyal to the HOA, were furious, accusing the Turners of slander and betrayal. But what mattered most was that the tide had begun to turn. The Turners weren't fighting alone anymore. In the days that followed, the pressure intensified. Mrs. Trent, now exposed, retaliated in every way she could. The HOA issued threats, and even some of the neighbors who had once supported Claire and David began to distance themselves. But the Turners didn't back down. They couldn't. This fight wasn't just for their daughter's right to play in the pool. It was for the right of every family to live free from fear, oppression, and abuse of power. As the battle continued, Ella, seeing her parents fight so fiercely for her, began to show signs of healing. She started drawing again, creating vibrant pictures that filled the walls of her room. She wasn't the same girl she had been when this all started, but the fire within her had been reignited. She knew, now more than ever, that she was worth fighting for. The breaking point had arrived. It was only a matter of time before Mrs. Trent's reign would come to an end. The Turners had exposed the truth, and no amount of power, threats, or intimidation could erase that. The fight was far from over, but they were ready. Together, they would finish it. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the Turners took their seats at the front. This was the moment they had been fighting for. the moment that would determine whether justice would prevail or if the dark forces of power and corruption would continue to reign over their community. For the first time in weeks, Claire felt a flicker of hope. The truth, the evidence they had gathered, and the support of the community were now in their corner. But even with that, she knew they were up against a formidable enemy. Mrs. Trent sat at the opposite end of the courtroom, her posture rigid and unyielding, flanked by her lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man who looked as if he was used to winning. Claire couldn't help but notice the smug look on Mrs. Trent's face, as if she believed that her power would once again shield her from the consequences of her actions. But this time, the Turners were not going to let that happen. David, sitting beside Claire, squeezed her hand. The battle had been long, and the emotional toll had been heavier than they could have ever imagined. But now here, they were at the precipice of change, and they weren't going to back down. This was for Ella. This was for everyone who had ever been hurt or silenced by people like Mrs. Trent. The judge, an older man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, called the court to order. The proceedings began, and the courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of tension. The lawyer for the HOA, Mr. Thompson, stood up first, his voice smooth and calculated as he began to present his case. This case, he said, is a simple matter of maintaining order within a private community. The Turner's daughter, Ella, disrupted the peace of the neighborhood by asking about the pool, a question which led to tension and division. The HOA's actions were not only justified but necessary to ensure the safety and integrity of this community. As Mr. Thompson spoke, Claire's anger simmered beneath the surface. The idea that their daughter had been blamed for causing tension by simply asking a question made her blood boil. But she kept her composure, knowing that this was just the beginning. David leaned over and whispered, "We're not here to defend just a question about a pool. We're here to expose the entire system." The first witness was called Ms. Harris, the elderly woman who had come forward with crucial testimony about Mrs. Trent's manipulative tactics. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she watched Ms. Harris make her way to the stand. Ms. Harris was known to be a quiet, reserved woman, but in that moment, she was nothing short of a warrior. "I've lived in this community for over 30 years," Ms. Harris began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I've seen the HOA change over the years, but it's never been as oppressive as it is under Mrs. Trent's leadership. She's taken control of every decision, every rule, and her actions have hurt more people than I can count." She paused, her eyes scanning the courtroom. "I remember when she first came to power. There were small things, rules about lawn decorations, parking spaces, noise levels, but it quickly escalated. Mrs. Trent uses fear and intimidation to get what she wants. And when the Turners moved in, I saw the way she treated them, especially Ella. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair." Claire's heart swelled with gratitude for Ms. Harris's courage. She had witnessed firsthand the lengths Mrs. Trent would go to in order to maintain her control, and now, here was a woman willing to speak out and expose the truth. The next witness was Claire herself. She rose from her seat, her hands trembling slightly, but she stood tall as she made her way to the stand. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her, but she didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this moment for so long. This was her chance to make her voice heard, to fight for Ella, and to make sure no one would ever treat her daughter like she was less than human again. "Mrs. Turner," the judge asked, his voice calm but direct, "can you tell us why you're here today?" Claire took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "We're here today because my daughter Ella was treated unfairly. She was discriminated against not because of anything she did, but because of her disability. All she did was ask a simple question about the pool, and she was made to feel like she didn't belong here. And when we tried to stand up for her, we were threatened, intimidated, and silenced by Mrs. Trent and the HOA. This is not just about a pool, it's about a system that has been allowed to perpetuate harm for far too long." Claire paused, her eyes meeting Mrs. Trent's for the first time since the trial began. Mrs. Trent's eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy, but Claire refused to look away. She needed to make sure her words reached everyone in the room, especially those who had been complicit in the abuse. "We're not asking for special treatment," Claire continued, her voice gaining strength. "We're asking for respect. We're asking for the right to live in peace without being made to feel like we don't belong here, like we're lesser than everyone else. Ella deserves to be treated with dignity, just like every other child in this community. She deserves to feel safe." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of Claire's words hanging in the air. She could feel the eyes of the jury on her, their expressions unreadable. But she knew she had made her case. She had exposed the truth. After Claire's testimony, it was time for the defense. Mrs. Trent stood, her voice cold as she addressed the courtroom. "The HOA has always acted in the best interest of the community. Any claims of mistreatment are exaggerated. The Turners have brought this upon themselves by creating unnecessary conflict. My actions were simply in line with the rules, and the rules are there for a reason." Her words were filled with self-righteousness, but Claire could see through them. Mrs. Trent had no remorse. She believed she was untouchable. The judge's final words rang in Claire's ears. "This court will deliberate and make a decision based on the evidence presented. We will adjourn for today." As Claire sat back down next to David, she felt a sense of finality. It wasn't over yet, but the battle had shifted. The truth had been laid bare, and now it was in the hands of the judge and jury. All they could do was wait and hope that the scales of justice would finally tip in their favor. For the first time in a long time, Claire allowed herself to breathe, knowing that no matter what happened next, they had fought with everything they had. And that was enough. The days following the courtroom battle felt like an agonizing waiting game, each tick of the clock dragging on longer than the last. Claire and David sat in their living room, the weight of everything they had fought for pressing heavily on their shoulders. They had done everything they could. They had exposed the truth, fought tooth and nail for Ella's dignity, and stood up to a system that had been suffocating their family. But now, they were waiting for a decision that would determine their future. Ella had been quieter than usual, retreating into her world of drawing and reading. The strain of the past few months had taken its toll on her, and Claire could see the shadows of fear still lingering in her daughter's eyes. But even through it all, Ella had shown incredible strength. She was no longer the frightened child who had been told she didn't belong. She was becoming the courageous, young girl who had fought for her right to be seen. Claire knew that no matter what the outcome of the trial was, this experience had changed their family forever. The morning the verdict was due, the tension in the Turner household was palpable. Claire couldn't focus on anything. She kept pacing the living room, her mind spinning. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 10:30 a.m. The verdict was supposed to be announced soon. David was sitting by the window, his hand on his chin, his eyes distant. They hadn't spoken much this morning, both of them lost in their own thoughts, each wondering what the next chapter of their lives would hold. Finally, the phone rang. Claire's heart leaped in her chest. David reached for the phone on the coffee table, his fingers trembling slightly as he answered. It was the court's office. "Hello." David's voice was tight with anticipation. "Mr. Turner, we've just received the verdict. The judge will be making a formal announcement at 2 p.m. today. Please be sure to tune in," the voice on the other end said, the words carrying a sense of finality. David hung up the phone and turned to Claire, his face a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "We have to wait until this afternoon. The judge will announce it on a public broadcast." Claire's heart sank, but she forced a smile for Ella, who had come into the room, sensing the change in the air. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We're just waiting for the news, okay?" Ella nodded, though her small face betrayed a deep anxiety that Claire couldn't ignore. "Do you think they'll let me play in the pool now, Mom?" Ella asked, her voice soft, the question hanging in the air like an unanswered prayer. Claire crouched down to Ella's level, her heart breaking at the innocence in her daughter's voice. "I hope so, darling. But no matter what happens, you have the right to play and be happy. No one can take that from you, not ever." Ella smiled faintly, but Claire could tell she still didn't fully believe it. The emotional scars of the past few months ran deep, and Claire knew that even with the outcome of the trial, it would take time for Ella to heal from the hurt she had endured. The afternoon dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. At exactly 2 p.m., the TV in the living room buzzed to life. Claire, David, and Ella gathered in front of the screen, waiting for the moment they had been dreading and hoping for. The judge's face appeared on the screen. His expression was solemn as he began to speak. After carefully reviewing all the evidence, testimonies, and arguments presented, I have reached a decision in the case of the Turner family versus the Homeowners Association. The actions of Mrs. Trent and the HOA have been found to be discriminatory and unjust. The court has ruled that the Turners' rights have been violated and compensation will be provided for the emotional and psychological damage caused to their daughter, Ella. Furthermore, the HOA is to revise its policies regarding accessibility and inclusivity for disabled individuals within the community. Claire's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. The words she had been waiting to hear, the words that would change everything, were finally here. And the judge continued, Mrs. Trent is to step down from her position as head of the HOA, and a new, independent board will be appointed to oversee the neighborhood's regulations moving forward. This decision is final. For a moment, everything felt surreal. The weight of what had just happened settled in Claire's chest, and she felt a mixture of relief, disbelief, and triumph all at once. The battle was over. Mrs. Trent had been held accountable, and their fight for justice had been won. David looked at Claire, his face breaking into a smile as he pulled her into a tight embrace. We did it. We actually did it. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, and she held David close, feeling the incredible weight of the moment. We did it for Ella. For her. She deserves to know she's worth fighting for. Ella, standing beside them, looked up at her parents, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and hope. Does this mean I can play in the pool now, Mom? Claire laughed through her tears, wiping them away. Yes, sweetheart. It means you can do whatever you want. You can be free. Ella's face lit up with a smile that melted Claire's heart. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, hugging her tightly. I knew you'd make it right. The relief they all felt in that moment was indescribable. The years of tension, the countless sleepless nights, the fear and anger, they were all gone now. They had faced the darkness, and they had come out victorious. As the news segment ended and the finality of the verdict settled in, Claire knew that this wasn't just a victory for their family. It was a victory for every family that had been oppressed by an HOA, every child who had been made to feel like they didn't belong, and every person who had fought for justice against a system that seemed unbreakable. But the victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the small moments, the ones that mattered the most. The smile on Ella's face as she dreamed of playing in the pool, the knowledge that they had made the world a little bit better for her, and the unwavering belief that no matter what, they could face anything together. The battle had been long, but they had won. And now it was time to rebuild, time to heal, time to live. In the weeks following the trial, life for the Turner family began to slowly shift back to normal. But normal wasn't quite the same as it had been before the conflict had begun. The shadow of the battle with the HOA still loomed over them, but it no longer held the same weight. They had won, but it was the scars of the journey that reminded them of how hard they had fought to get here. Ella was slowly starting to open up again. The fear and anxiety that had taken root in her heart over the past few months were beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar spark of curiosity and joy that Claire had missed so much. She had started drawing again, bright, colorful pictures of the world around her, of her dreams, and of the freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim. She would often sit in the backyard, sketching the trees, the pool, and the neighborhood, things she had once been afraid to touch. For Claire and David, the transition from battle to healing was just as difficult. They had spent so much time consumed by the fight, so much energy focused on defeating the oppressive force of Mrs. Trent and the HOA, that now, with the victory in hand, they weren't sure what to do with the calm that followed. The relief was overwhelming, But it was also a little disorienting. For so long, they had been fighting to make the world better for Ella, but now that the world was a little brighter, it left them wondering how to move forward without the constant weight of worry pressing on them. The community, too, had changed. In the wake of the court decision, many of the residents who had once supported Mrs. Trent began to reassess their loyalty to her. The truth, once hidden, had finally come to light, and many neighbors felt embarrassed or guilty for not having spoken up sooner. A few, like Ms. Harris, had already stepped forward, but for many, the change came too late. Still, the neighborhood was healing in its own way, and people began to come together in small ways that hadn't been possible when Mrs. Trent's iron grip had held sway over everyone. One afternoon, a small group of residents, those who had rallied behind the Turners during the trial, organized a community gathering in the park. It wasn't much, just a few tables of food, some music, and a lot of conversations, but for Claire and David, it felt like a turning point. Ella, finally free from the weight of fear, ran around the park with the other children, her laughter filling the air like it had before the battle started. For the first time in months, Claire felt her shoulders relax, her breath even out. David sat beside Claire on a bench, watching Ella play. He smiled, but there was a distant look in his eyes, a trace of the anxiety that hadn't quite dissipated. He turned to Claire, his hand finding hers. It feels strange, doesn't it? To finally be free from all that stress. It's like we're in a different world. Claire nodded, her gaze fixed on their daughter. It does, but I think we're going to be okay. Ella's going to be okay. David squeezed her hand, his voice filled with conviction. She's stronger than I ever gave her credit for. And so are we. We've all been through so much, but we came out the other side together. As they sat there, taking in the quiet, peaceful afternoon, Claire couldn't help but think about the journey they had taken. The road had been long, filled with obstacles that had tested their resolve and their love. But in the end, they had triumphed, not just in court, but in the quiet, powerful way they had supported each other and kept moving forward. Later that evening, after Ella had fallen asleep, Claire and David sat in the living room, reflecting on the past few months. The quiet between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with the tension and fear that had once gripped their home. Claire turned to David, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. We've always been a team, but I think we're stronger now. We've been through something most people can't even imagine, and we made it through together. David looked at her, his expression softening. I've always known you were strong, Claire. But seeing how you fought for Ella, seeing how you refused to give up on her, it's made me realize just how much we can accomplish when we're united. They shared a quiet moment, the weight of their shared experiences settling in. It wasn't just about the victory over Mrs. Trent or the HOA, it was about how far they had come as a family, how they had faced the worst that life could throw at them and still managed to stand tall, side by side, stronger than before. As time passed, the community continued to heal. The HOA, now under new leadership, began to shift its policies. The new board made strides to create a more inclusive environment for everyone, ensuring that no one would ever have to experience what the Turners had endured. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Ella's confidence grew with every passing day. She made new friends, and the children in the neighborhood welcomed her into their games without hesitation. The pool, once a symbol of exclusion, became a place of joy and laughter once more, and Ella was among the first to splash around in its waters, her smile as bright as the sun. For Claire and David, the most important victory was not the legal one, but the one that took place in their hearts. They had come together as a family in ways they hadn't imagined possible. They had shown Ella that no matter what the world threw at her, she was worth fighting for. And in doing so, they had proven to themselves that they were capable of more than they had ever realized. As the years went by, the Turners became a symbol of resilience, a reminder to their neighbors that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. The fight for justice had been long and hard, but in the end, they had not only changed their own lives, but had made their community a little bit better. Ella had taught them all that strength didn't come from avoiding adversity, but from facing it head on and never giving up. And as Claire watched Ella grow, flourish, and embrace her life with open arms, she knew that the future, though uncertain, was full of endless possibilities. The Turner family had weathered the storm, and now they could finally look forward to a life of peace, love, and the joy of simply being together. For Claire, David, and Ella, the victory was more than just a courtroom win. It was a new beginning. Thank you for following Ella's journey and the Turner family's fight for justice. Their story is a reminder that no one should ever feel excluded or powerless. If you believe in standing up against injustice and fighting for what's right, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more powerful stories and real-life victories here on HOA Denied Access. Share this video with your friends and family. Together, we can make a difference